Well, happy Sunday night. How are you guys doing? It is great to see you.
Hey,
I'm
hanging
doing
in there. This 2021 apparently is not going to be the cute and cuddly year we were hoping it was.
I know. We just got done with our Refounding Fathers show. We had about 15 people that were live on that watching, which was a lot of fun. And we were just talking big tech versus Trump and Twitter and everything changing and what's social media going to look like in the future. So, I mean,
yeah.
2021 is off to a roaring start. I've got my Constitution glass here, and I was going to ask you guys, like, can I still pour into this? Do we still have a Constitution for which my glass like can actually pay homage?
They,
Like, I think so, I think so. But my goodness, like, what a crazy week. I
so
know. Go ahead,
I'm a
John.
Game of Thrones fan, and it was funny because they said there's a meme that has like 2020, and it shows like Prince Joffrey, who's like a villain in Game of Thrones, and he's pretty nasty. And then it shows 2021, and it has Ramsay Bolton, who's like, and he's like two times worse than that. You're like, that's not helping. This is not helping at all.
No, no. I mean, there's all the memes going around of 2020 versus 2021. That's not a
Right.
good way to start, right? Like, I'm 5 days in and I want to return. All that kind of stuff. But like at the same time, I was telling the guys in the last show that I got so much positive feedback from what we did on Wednesday, and I'm so grateful, that I had you on, John. I can't wait to get your thoughts, Josh, as well. I was seeing this stuff going on at the Capitol. It doesn't take rocket science to put it together. What's going on. I'm like, yep, some people took it too far. The notion that, hey, the deep state runs everything, everyone is corrupt within the Capitol, and Mike Pence needs to be hanged, like all this kind of rhetoric that's been floating around. Somebody took it too far, and then it doesn't take much, right? Like the emotion just overwhelms people. There's been all kinds of reports of people saying, hey, I just get caught up in the moment. But I'm so grateful for our show of our chance being able to take a stand and say, hey, look, this is what we've been talking about all year. Is there's a better way to do this, a more civil way. So I was very grateful that we had a chance to do that, and now we have a chance to have a drink and relax. So always thrilled to have John on the show from the Berkeley Conservative, as well as Josh from Saving Elephants. It's great to have you back, man. I know you've been busy, doing your articles and your blog and everything. I'm grateful to have you on as we kind of make sense of this. I know most people have the facts and stuff on what's occurred. Um, just heard from Chris, just heard from Kyle from the Democratic and the Libertarian perspectives relatively, but I can't wait to talk to you guys about really the future of conservatism, because that's kind of a
Mm.
question that I have of where do we go from here? Is the conservative movement something that's strong, or is it in shambles? How do we start to make sense of the future? I have literally seen conservative people, leaders, influencers on social media and stuff that always have something to say this week, being like, I'm not sure what to tell you. Like, where do we go
Mm.
from here? I don't know. So
Mm.
I'm curious, do you see us, conservatism as in a crisis? Josh, do you see us as, are we rethinking things? Because I mean, that's what I said in the last show, but I want to hear your thoughts too. Am I right? Like, what do you
Hey,
think?
I've been asking that question ever since election night, and I've said this over and over. Election, even though I don't buy that Donald Trump won the election, I think he lost, but it wasn't a repudiation of Trumpism. He still got a lot of
Mm.
people to vote for him. And I've been asking that question. Okay, well, what does this mean? And I think we just amplified the question, on Wednesday. You know, could this mean there's forever a civil war within conservatism, or is this the last desperate dying breath of a very radical Trumpian movement within the conservative movement? I don't know.
Yeah. It's one of those things that I believe it was Senator Langford that was from Oklahoma that was
Mhm.
talking. And he's pretty partial to we need more investigation into fraud. He's very much, closer to the Trump crowd than most other senators that were on the floor. I mean, you had Ted Cruz, you had numerous other senators who were willing to say, hey, I want to raise objections. So, like Trump's arguments, his beliefs, what he wanted was being represented in Congress at the time, that people were there. And again, if they had just gone over and protested, what I think that was the intention of most people. But again, it doesn't take much for it to go too far. And of course, the media's there to cover it and everything else. But it's something that we've got to work through because, I had said this on Wednesday. I said it during the previous show, and I'll continue saying it. Is there are so many times in like a sports game where the referees make a bad call and nobody likes it, except the other team.
Mhm.
And it's frustrating that they do that. But again, they're the referees. And when you look at the court system, there is a process to handle fraud in this country. And you may not like what the courts decided, but as you get into these cases, you start to realize, the Trump lawyers could have done a much better job. They were throwing stuff left and right all over the place, and they really discredit themselves. So if you're going to protest something, I would protest Rudy Giuliani and the lawyers. I mean, like, dude, why were you so bad at your job? Why couldn't you guys make a better argument to explain? Because just to walk people through some of this, in every election there is fraud. There's certainly cases of that happening in this election, but if you overstate it, then it's not going to be handled well by a court. They're going to throw you out. And so many times they took small elements of fraud and they said, see, this is it, conspiracy, it's everywhere.
Mhm.
And then they didn't have that ready to be able to prove. And I get it, it was chaotic, it's post-election, but with so many states in doubt, with so many states, for someone to have a conspiracy that undermines the entire election in that many states, it's got to be massive. It can't just be a little element here and a few thousand votes there, right? And I just don't think that they made the case well. The courts didn't take it seriously, and here we are. But does that mean that Mike Pence needs to be hanged? Does that mean that windows need to be smashed in the Capitol building? It wasn't. They're not the court system. Go. A couple more blocks over to the Supreme Court if you want to be more precise. And really, again, bring it back to Trump's legal team because they did not have their stuff together. That's how I see it. But how do we get back to a point where we actually have some semblance of faith in our institutions? I don't know. That's why I've got some Dragon's Milk bourbon barrel aged stout, and you guys to be able to help me figure out that thing. But
Good old fashioned Guinness.
there we
Brings
go.
everybody.
We got to sort through this. So looks like we got about 10 folks that are watching live. That's a question for you. If you are a conservative and you're watching this show, drop us a comment. Where does conservatism go from here? Do we ever trust an election again? How do we ensure fraud doesn't occur? How do we start to piece together this? Because we're about to find ourselves with Joe Biden as president. We're about to find ourselves apparently with a Democratic Senate, a Democratic House, and all we have is the Supreme Court. But so many, conservatives don't trust that anyway because it threw out, the lawsuits that Trump was filing. So where do we go? How do we rebuild this movement? I think we're going to need some strong voices. Go ahead, John. You had something.
Well, there's just a lot of thoughts running through my head. Everything from how do we heal to what happened, and why not take the protests, the people that are to blame. And I think that just first off, Trump holds so much responsibility as a failed leader about what happened. I mean, we wish that people were entirely rational and knew who was at fault, and then they would go protest the courts or Rudy Giuliani or somebody. But you have Trump right there that morning rallying everybody, saying stop the steal. We're not going to let this happen. He's on Twitter calling, Mike Pence a coward for not doing something that would be illegal, and stopping, Biden being elected. And, and so what are people supposed to do, right? Who are all about Trump. They're going to obviously take it to that logical conclusion of, storm the Capitol. All we can do is, do this by force, right? And then take selfies in people's chairs. So that I think is one thing to consider. That I don't think Trumpism is going away. Even if you were to impeach him, even if you made sure that he was never going to run again, like you don't have these people going online and apologizing. You don't have these people saying, unless they have like some type of political reputation to lose, right? You don't have them going on and saying, I'm sorry, but this was a mistake. You don't, I mean, from 24 to 48 hours after it all happened, you had Republicans and GOPers who, he lost some support. Some people resigned, but many rallied to him publicly.
Sure.
And I think, when we talk about healing, I really do want, those who are watching, you can look and see how Arnold Schwarzenegger on his Twitter account responded with his video. It's about 7 minutes long. And he has such powerful words of healing, talking about America. He has like a sword. He's like holding a sword like over his shoulder, talking about how this sword was made and how it's tempered steel and it goes through the fire and it's cooled down and it goes through the fire again. And it's such a strong affirmation of American principles, of American freedoms, of the Constitution. And whether you're, and he totally, throws out the political parties. He just says, we come and we come as a nation, as a country. That is our, our service. And I think more, we need to be able to show those things more often, as much as possible, regardless of whether you're Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, moderate, whatever, the people who are trying to push for healing, we need to showcase that.
Sure. But my question is, like, what is the alternative? And I know this is heavy for Conservatism on Tap, but we got lots of soul searching to do, and I guess we got many shows to do it. But Susie's got a comment here where she says, "I voted for Trump's beliefs, right? For what he stood for and what he was fighting for." And I guess, what is the alternative? Do we go back to that omnibus spending bill, where every congressman and congresswoman's like pet project was included? And they're spending trillions of dollars on all kinds of ridiculous stuff, right, every year. I guess that's the question, is in this country, we still have a fundamental problem in that if you run for office, right, you are almost always going to beat a grassroots effort if you are funded by particular special interest. If I'm going to run for office and then a big business donates $40,000 to my campaign, I'm going to beat little Joe Schmo, grassroots effort over here because I'm going to have the money to be able to advertise everywhere, and he won't, or she won't, and then I win. And then whenever that business that donated $40,000 to my campaign comes calling, I'm going to listen because that's how I get reelected, right? That's still a fundamental problem. One of the things that Trump brought is he was self-funded, so he didn't care what any of those people thought. And he was willing to fight that system. So we can say that he took it too far, that he was on terrible behavior. You can hold him responsible, for what happened if you want in the Capitol. But at the same time, where do we go from here? Do we lose, the chance to be able to change the system? Do we go back, to one in which people are just bought and sold? That there's still a lot of problems here, even if Democrats get what they want that are fundamental to the system. So I want to talk about that. I do want to I loved, Josh had an article here and I want to go through it real quick. So, Josh here from Saving Elephants has a fantastic blog, and he had written an article called America Under Attack. And he was talking about how, this attack did not represent conservatives. It was America under attack. And I want to give him a chance to be able to defend that. I've definitely got some questions for him on this. He said, I'll give you a quote here that Josh wrote. He said, "The real damage, the far greater threat, is what this incursion represented. It was a seditious act on the final step in the centuries-long process of peacefully transferring power from one individual to another." And you can see Josh's full article on Saving Elephants blog, where he's got it listed, as well as some of his awesome shows and interviews. But Josh, if you wanted to talk about that, and then we kind of like work through this, work through what does this represent, what was this attack actually on, and how does conservatism recover and build? So, all you, brother, go for it.
Yeah, I would say that going all the way back to 2016, I'm well on the record. I'm not a fan of Donald Trump. I think there's a lot of things he's done that I support. There's a lot of things he's done I oppose. But I have consistently maintained for 4 years the number one thing I have opposed about Donald Trump is when he would make comments like in 2016 that we're going to have to wait and see till the night of the election to determine he's going to keep us in suspense. Is he going to respect the results of the election? He told us for months going into this that we couldn't trust the results of the 2020 race. I think the most irresponsible thing Trump has done, ground zero, is this right here, consistently calling into question the integrity of our electoral process. And those protesters that stormed into the Capitol, in my view, represented far more than just people who busted windows and vandalized, and far more than, as tragic as it was far more than 5 people dying. This was, in some sense, in the MAGA world, the foot soldiers that were directly attacking the very process, the very rule of law that you and I and the rest of our country depends upon to peaceably transfer power from one leader to the next. And that's just, that is something that a president cannot do. It's unconscionable.
Yeah. As I look through this, and I'll bring it back here to the main screen, I I think about the outcome of this, and it really gets to a point where when you can't trust results that you don't like. It's like it is
Mm.
totally fair to believe that the election was fraudulent and that there was more fraud than the media has covered. Like that's an opinion. People can have that opinion, but in our system, it's not just the democratic elements that have the final say. Our system is a republic, right? Our system is a
Mhm.
republic. It's got a mixed government with the Supreme Court, with the presidency, with, the Congress. And so people may not like it, but at the same time, in our system, in the Constitution that I'm, sitting here toasting to, the court gets the final say in whether this met the threshold to look at. And that's what I was shocked. I was like, if you want to protest something, protest the Supreme Court because they're the ones that refuse to hear the case. The other thing is, we had talked about this on our show when the election actually happened, is like, if this had gotten down to a single state, right, like 2000 did, I think it would have been a lot easier to be able to get our minds around what was going on. Because when you looked at Florida and it was between Gore and Bush, it was very close. And so there was a lot of scrutiny. In this election, it was chaos. It was chaos because there were so many different states and so many different issues and so many, different things to be able to sort through all of that. And I think I think you're right there in terms of criticizing Trump because he just said, well, it's just massive fraud and that's it. Well, unless it affected every single state, unless you want to say that Dominion was responsible for all this, which hasn't been proven, right? Then there's probably different issues in different states. And I'll tell you guys, in Pennsylvania, there definitely was some. There's a long history there in Pennsylvania of issues, but those are not the same issues in Arizona or Georgia, right? Some of the
Mhm.
other states. And so it got really complicated really fast. That's the frustration. I don't like it. But at the same time, I'm willing to accept the fact that I don't always get what I want, And what do we do as conservatives? Okay, we go back, we do better next time. Trump could have set himself up to run in 2024, right? We could have focused more of our energy and effort on Georgia. But if people think that all elections are fraudulent and that's it, then how can you expect them to vote? So I think this didn't have to be the end of some of the good things about Trump's presidency, but it
Mhm.
may be. And I think that's really, really unfortunate because there's still an argument there for government that isn't tied to special interest. And that's what I see people struggling with. So, any thoughts on that?
I think it's a good thought to say that, in a democracy, in a democratic republic, we need to have the attitude of, well, this time I didn't get what I want. That's how elections work. But I think what needs to be added to that is when we say we didn't get what we want, that does not mean what we wanted was for the legitimate winner of the election to become president. That happened. That is going to happen.
Yeah.
This was not a coup. This was not such a fraudulent election that the winner didn't win. And you're right, Wes, the Supreme Court didn't hear the case. The reason the Supreme Court didn't hear the case is because they don't decide state by state cases. Now, in the
Right.
case of Bush and Gore, that was a little bit different. But that doesn't mean courts didn't hear the case. I think we're up to 60 separate court cases in multiple states in which Donald Trump and his allies, in spite of the fact they've continuously for months now claimed they have all this evidence, have failed to present in a court of law 60 different times compelling evidence that this was fraudulent.
Yeah.
And I don't know how else to conclude other than this is a lie. Donald Trump lost the election.
Yeah. I think they've got to do a better case when it comes to the legal teams. I think that's where you put the fault is if you're going to prove something like that, you need to have your stuff together. And I just don't think that they were prepared to be able to do that. And I think they grasped at straws in several cases. And that's how the other thing that made this election particularly confusing, let's not forget, is COVID. It's so many times
Mhm.
I've heard Trump talk about the rallies. I mean, I live in Florida, right? So Pensacola, right down the street, massive rallies in Pensacola and all around here. It's very much Trump country. And you see all these people, who support him and everything else. But then what you don't see are a lot of the liberals who are at home because of COVID, and Biden is telling them, hey, we're not going to have a rally at all, right? And so what you see doesn't line up to who are actually voting. And if you go back to, there was a phone
Mhm.
call between Georgia, the Secretary of State, and Trump, and he was talking about in my rallies in Georgia, everyone was there. And I have no doubt, you know, but what about all the people who are at home? You don't see them, you don't know, and it seems kind of suspicious. And so it's a weird time with COVID happening, you know, and I
Mhm.
wonder, I can't help but wonder if we didn't have COVID going on, if Biden was having rallies, would they have been the same size as Trump's, right? And if they had, would people be less, you know, likely to think to immediately go to there's fraud, it doesn't make sense, right? So there's a lot of things that are very weird with this. Alex is talking or writing a comment, and he said, "Is it time for a new conservative party?" You know, to a degree, possibly, you know, but at the same time, we'd have to figure out what the values of that, you know, would be. That'd be my take. But I'll let you go ahead, John. What do you think?
I was just thinking that one of the more significant speeches that I enjoyed hearing off the Senate floor, the night that all the violence had occurred, was Mitt Romney's. Where he said that what we need is us to be unanimous in this and say that President-elect Biden has won. That will be a strong refutation of what has happened here. That people deserve the truth, and we need, as a Republican Party, to show how we lose, like how to lose properly,
Mhm.
and to reevaluate ourselves, to rethink our strategies. I've lost a president election, so like it's not fun, but we go on with our lives and we figure out how to do it through the system next time. And I'm beginning to highlight, I guess, the problem that you had made known, Josh, in your article, which is that it is impossible to try and refute every single instance of people who bring up that fraud had occurred in the election, right? For every time that you say that, okay, this issue of fraud that actually wasn't fraud, that was actually part of the system working, then like there's like three more that crop up, and it's almost impossible to try and refute all of them, because all I need is one time where that actually was fraud, and they feel that the entire election was illegitimate and completely fraudulent. And I'm just wondering, how do you talk to somebody like that? You can't prove it through a logical means of saying like, obviously, yeah, maybe that happened once. That doesn't mean that the entire system or all those states, had poor systems.
Yeah.
So I'm beginning to ask myself, like, where do like you said, how do we lose? How do we lose properly and tell people it's okay to have lost?
Well,
Now
I
we need
think
to figure out how to reform.
what I have felt, to be honest with you guys, what I have felt over the past couple of years is that as conservatives, we've stopped making actual like arguments and things like that. And it's more about, hey, like just the people who agree get together, you know, and let's have a get together, right? Like there are so many like young kids today who didn't grow up during the time of the Soviet Union, right? Socialism to them is just free college and Bernie Sanders. And you try to talk to them about, you know, what's going on in Cuba, or you talk to them about, you know, China and everything else, or Tiananmen Square. And they're like, when you say China, I'm thinking Chinese food, and I'm thinking like, you know, getting stuff off of Amazon. Like, what do you mean socialism? And they don't know about, you know, the fact that the Nazis were a socialist party and World War, you know, they just don't know their history. They don't even know the basics of the belief when you get into Rousseau and Marx and Engels and how it's been built. You know, it's just not something that is discussed or explained. And I feel like as conservatives, we've stopped, you know, explaining why does socialism not work, and we're just quick to say, "Oh, you're a communist," and now, you know, we dismiss you, right?
Mhm.
And I think about, and I know we've got to talk about it on some more episodes, but I think of Cobra Kai, right? Like one of my favorite shows right now. And at one point in the show, Johnny Lawrence starts telling his guys, he's like, stop going for weak shots, right? He's like, stop, you know, cheating. He's like, you want your opponent to be at their best so that you can take them down at their best. And like all of the students are like, what? You've been teaching us to cheat the whole time. And he's like, it's changing, right? And he
Mhm.
starts to like evolve the concept of Cobra Kai into something that's a little bit more honorable, right? And I feel like that's what conservatives have to recover is like, you know, I am more than happy to have a conversation with someone who is not conservative, who's a liberal, who's a Democrat, who's a socialist or whatever, as long as they're willing to have a conversation with me. Because I know that socialism is based off of mistaken beliefs about human nature. And we're going to explain that to you and how the precepts of socialism don't work. And you know what? Not just me, but let's empower other people to do that, to be able to fight on those grounds, right? That's not where we have been, I feel like, as the conservative movement. Instead, it's about dismissing people and arguing and hating as opposed to discussing. And I understand where people come from is they think, how many times do we have to make this argument against socialism? But I would say, get used to it. You always are. There's always going to be, some opposition. There's always going to be some sense of evil in the world. We just need to settle in and get used to having to make the cause of liberty and justice over and over and over again to every new generation. Like Reagan said, by the way. But I don't feel like we've been doing that, And so when you don't do that, when you don't believe in the power of discussion and free thought to be able to arrive at the truth, you end up with stuff like this. So I agree with you, Josh, in your article and all those things. But all that it is to say is that we need to do a better process of growing conservatives to be people who understand the points and can explain them.
Yeah. And I think, reemphasizing just our history, that we didn't get to the way that we are just because one party ended up winning and pushed their agenda, against the other party. It was because of compromise. It was because of thoughtful discussion. It was because, they were willing to, do what was necessary to actually sit at the table and make that discussion. Like, I think that's one of the lessons of Hamilton, in the musical, where it's like he had to learn how to compromise with Thomas Jefferson and Madison in order to, proceed with some of his own agendas about how the nation could actually function as a government.
Yeah, man, like basic examples, and I don't want to take up too much time, but I remember reading in history class about Lenin, right? During the Russian Revolution, is after they had the revolution in Russia, they established the basics of the Soviet Union. All of a sudden, they realized that they had run off or killed all of the managers in the industrialization that was occurring in Russia. And they were like, who's going to manage the factories now? And they were like, I don't know, right? And they put random people in charge of these factories who had no idea what they're doing. And people just stopped going to work and they had no sense of organization. They were like, crap, we made a mistake. Like, production is going to an all-time low. And they actually had what was called the new economic policy before Lenin died, to be able to try to bring in some of those managers back to be able to reestablish some of the bourgeoisie that they had just spent their entire revolution saying were the enemy, to get things back on. And that's where Stalin came in and said, oh, I know how to get people to work. I'll just kill them if they don't, right? There's the story of socialism in less than a minute, right? Is you believe that you don't need management. You believe that you don't need any type of direction from the top. Then you discover that you can't, right? You can't do it without that. And then you have to negotiate it, or you turn nasty and mean, right? It doesn't take, it's not hard to be able to articulate why that doesn't exactly work. But we don't do that. We just say, you're a communist, I don't have to listen to you, right? You're a socialist, you're a liberal, like, get out of here, And I don't think that's enough. And it's frustrating to people who have lived during the Soviet Union, who have seen it collapse, who have seen what communist China is capable of, to have to make that argument. But if we don't make that argument, then it actually wins, right? And that's what you're seeing, I think, is more and more of the younger generation is gravitating towards that. Not enough
and Wes,
to see the benefit. Go ahead.
I think that's a two-parter too. I agree with you, but I think in addition to being able to peacefully, kindly, and respectfully show someone why what they believe is wrong, you also have to be able to offer to them something better.
Sure.
It's not just about tearing down what they believe. It's about, hey, what about this over here? And not to, toot my own little horn, but or on the podcast, on my episode coming out on Tuesday, it's the 1 year anniversary of the passing of Sir Roger Scruton. Have on a great friend, Brian Bay. He's an incredible, he's a professor, and he just very articulately runs through why Scruton was such an incredible thinker. And what I said at the beginning of that show said, this might seem like kind of a weird thing to throw in here, given the events of Wednesday. But I said, I want the listener to think about everything we're talking about, compare and contrast that with what we are told conservatism is and what we have seen this to be. And just for the moment, think, is this what I want? Or is what I've seen in the media what I want? And I don't think it's just enough that we, even say from the right, it's not just enough they say, hey, I disagree with Trump. It's got to be, here's something better.
All right. This is my last Cobra Kai plug for today. Okay. Like, is because I love what you're saying, and it makes me think of it because there's an epidemic in this country of fatherlessness, right? Of dads not stepping up to the plate for children that they have fathered, right? There is so many problems. It doesn't matter white, black, I don't care. Upper class, lower class. There is an epidemic, an absolute abdication of our role as members of families, right? The family is in decline in America. And I could give you all kinds of studies, all right? And then you have this show, right? That doesn't necessarily, like, it's not necessarily Christian, right? Like they swear plenty and everything else. But you have this show that dramatizes and shows these people, fathers, mothers, kids, working through family life and the benefits and the challenges of it, which I love that they don't sugarcoat it, and making it seem worthwhile. Why do you want this? And you see both LaRusso and Lawrence struggling with, this is tough, getting my kids to do what I want, and then my kid won't talk to me, and he's in juvie and all this other stuff. At the same time, they keep coming back to it because their life without it is just depressing and dark. Like, it's the most conservative show I've seen in years. And maybe it's even unintentional. I don't know. But Josh, when you talk about the benefits of doing it the conservative way, to me, that means these time-honored institutions that are difficult and that everyone struggles with, but that are worth advocating for and preserving and investing yourself in. And my gosh, man, that's what we need. That's what we need is positive voices that say, you know what? You know what's cool? Caring about other people. You know what's amazing? You know what's badass, to use Cobra Kai terminology? Investing in the next generation, right?
Yeah.
Like, and you see the results of that investment in the show. And frankly, I see it every day in real life. And that's where I spend a bunch of my time, is on my kids and helping others and investing myself in charities and things like this, because you see the benefit and it helps you be more conservative, right? It helps you feel cleansed as a person. And at the same time, you're doing the right thing. You're doing, right, God's work, what he intended you to do. And the more we get of that, frankly, the less angry I become and the less scared or fearful I become about the future of this country. When I actually get off my computer, get up from this, from this little apparatus, and I go out and I see it, and I'm like, you know what? Maybe the next generation, isn't going to succumb to socialism if I get off my butt and actually present a role model that's worth following for. So we need more of that, man. We need more, not just a little, show on Netflix, but we need more of that in our lives and in our role models. And frankly, I think Trump had some aspects of that, as, a father and things like that. And they tried to, prop that up, but it's not enough. There was one other comment here. I want to find it because it was from Susie. I'm going to find it here. She said she voted for Trump's beliefs, and she says here that she would support anyone else with the same beliefs that she can vote for. I wasn't following Trump as an icon. I want someone to speak my beliefs and values. And that's it right there, is you want someone with courage. And if all kids have, is a John Kreese or things like that, then, how can you expect them to go anywhere else? So I love it. I love what you're talking about, Josh. And I love the fact that you're kind of advocating for these principles and beliefs as opposed to constantly like focusing on the anger, which is what we see.
I think that's why conservatism won't go away. It's even no matter how much it loses on the electoral fronts, like it's never going to die out. It may reshape itself, but these are the things that, like you said, Wes, are time honored. I think these institutions are very thick skinned. They have true foundations. And even though they may not make an impact on Twitter, in another 4 years, like maybe Trump has, or maybe they've got to reevaluate how to do that. Like, I think that it will always be there, just because it's crucial for human existence. But I look back on my life. I think about the mentors that I've had. I think about the purposes of, like I told you before, of relocating churches and thinking about what's the new role that I should have. And I think it's mentorship. It's taking on somebody else and guiding them a little bit, and then being led in the process as well, and being changed and constantly developing. I think that it's that constant learning process through mentorship that's really going to help out. But it's not always glamorous. It's tough. It's tough to be able to do that and be vulnerable at times, and then at the same time to hear someone else be vulnerable and to process that with them. Sometimes it's showing your weak side and showing your strong side. It's life. Conservatism is a lifestyle.
Yeah, I mean, there's a
Yeah.
liberty there, right? Is that the truth, benefits from me articulating it, but it's not fully dependent on that. The truth is the truth, and if people, ignore it, they refuse to listen to it, right? Then it's going to come with consequences. But there's more going on than just my advocacy or arguing that type of thing, and that kind of frees me up to say, look, the truth is always going to be there waiting for me, and so now I get to just figure out the best ways to be able to speak it to people that are most effective, right? And
Mhm.
I mean, that's where I come at with this show is I want to figure out the ways to be able to explain that, like what actually helps you. And that's where I look back at my own life. Did someone just argue me into conservatism? Did someone, just say, hey, you need to shut up and listen to what I have to say? Like, that's not how I got there. Like I read books on it. I listened to people. I went out into the world and I was like, like this whole like religion thing seems to be good, when I start to do things the way that, my church tells me, like my life tends to turn out better. When I'm like kind to my wife and strong for my family and I go out and I make money for them and, and I invest it in things that are wholesome, like it comes back to me in all kinds of ways and I experience this joy in my life, and so maybe I should continue doing that, like, and then you start to attract people to it. And so I guess what I'm saying is we've had a lot of vinegar in the conservative movement, but we need a little honey to be able to
Wes, I
show.
mean,
Go ahead.
I know that there's that story of that congressman who was protecting the congresswoman during the
Yeah.
time where she was feeling like she was extremely anxious, that she thought that, I mean,
Yeah.
she had some anxiety about her future in that very moment. Was she going to die? She couldn't talk to her kids. And like you see that image of him reaching his hand out to just comfort her,
Yeah.
to protect her, that you feel like regardless of whatever party affiliation, like these are people coming together to look after one another in a very, very tense time. And I think that's, regardless of whether you're Democrat or Republican, that's conservatism, looking out for your fellow, your fellow person, your fellow brother or sister,
Yeah.
right there in that moment. That's a conservative. That's conservatism at work.
Yeah, I'll bring that up. Actually, got that picture right here. So Jason Crow, Democrat from Colorado. This guy
Yeah.
was an Army Ranger, and he was in one of the most amazing and lethal units that the U.S. military has. I actually worked with him when I was in Afghanistan, so I kind of know what he was doing, and pretty amazing what he was able to do. And he basically said, "I felt like I was back deployed whenever all this stuff was happening." And you can see the lady there who is also a congressperson, and she was having an anxiety attack and freaking out,
Hmm.
and he's just over there comforting her while he's watching to see what's going to occur. And I would disagree with Jason Crow on probably like 70% of the things that he stands for. I think he's pro gun control and all sorts of things. But it is, I think you're totally right, John. That in this moment, I agree with you, brother. Like you seem like a good guy who's doing the right thing, and I'm grateful for it, as opposed to, oh, this is just, bureaucrats and, they need to suffer. Like, who cares about them? They're not real people. Like, that's not the right attitude. But that being said, going back to what we were talking about, is I want to see him back up on his feet, talking. I want to see her back up on her feet talking, because I know if we're going to have a debate, that I'm going to have the truth on my side as a conservative, and I'm going to, I'm going to win, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's one of those things where I don't need to go to a level of violence, because the truth doesn't require that, from me, and because of the institutions that we've had, imperfect as they are, to be able to preserve them. When we talk about the electoral college, when we talk about, even if there was all this massive fraud and things, and that's frustrating as hell, does it mean that we just destroy everything, right? Like, do we kill Mike Pence? Do we do all those things? No, because these institutions are bigger than any one election, as hard as that may be able to stomach. So anyway, no, this is great. I really appreciate you guys. This is exactly the type of discussions I look forward to. A little bit more serious and heavy than what we normally have, but I feel like it's these type of discussions that are, that give me hope. Okay, I'm not just by myself thinking through this. And as we navigate through, okay, what's the good we can take from this? What's the good, in Trumpism, if you will, and at the same time, what can we add to it so that we don't find ourselves here again, 4 years from now or 8 years from now or whatever it is. So I'm grateful for you guys as amazing conservatives. You have definitely made me feel more comfortable drinking out of my Constitution glass again today.
I'm glad you feel better. I'm so glad you feel better.
Going through COVID and stuff, that's been, I've been fighting that thing off for 2 weeks, but I am feeling a lot better now. So I'm coming out of quarantine finally a couple of days ago. So I am, and thank you all for the prayers and everything for that. Josh, I want to give you one more time because, people know our website, thebrokenconservative.com. They know our YouTube, obviously our Facebook, Twitter, we're all over the place, but I always love having you on the show. I thank you for sharing your article with us. One more time, your website for people and the interviews that you got coming up. If you want to go ahead and plug that one last time, I'm sure they want to hear it.
Yeah, savingelefantsblog.com is the website. If you go to savingelephants.com, you're going to find people saving actual elephants. Or if you want to look for the podcast, Saving Elephants Podcast, or you could probably Google Saving Elephants Josh and find me.
Yeah, that's awesome stuff. I always love the things that you have on there and the articles and the interviews and all that stuff. Very similar guests that we have on the show. For everybody who's watching, feel free to check that out. Hit us up with the message which you want us to cover in the next several weeks. We do these shows every Sunday. So thank you guys one last time. Thanks for everybody who watched. And we will see you next Sunday for another episode of Conservatism on Tap. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.